have a small announcement to make. A hotel accommodation card was found on the floor of the hall next to the atrium. So please just make sure that you are not missing yours. If yes, just go there to the reception. The card should be there, so you can pick it up there. Yeah? Thank you.
Thank you. So welcome back to the next session, which will be called Empowering Conservation Strategy Tools and Case Studies. We have been hearing a lot about strategies for conservation, planning, decision-making, project selection, evaluation, etc. So in these sessions we are trying to give you some case studies that will show how people answer to some of these questions. So I just want to say that after this session there will be the cinema session, as I call that in Zagreb. They call the movie session, I like the cinema, which with a lot of interesting films, and one of them will be from the house, Francinek. You can take something to eat or drink before that, but you are all welcome to stay and see this wonderful work that is being done. So to start with, we are going to start with a presentation by Daniel Maloney. Daniel Maloney works for Cork University and Photo Wildlife, which we had the pleasure to visit this year during the Director's Day. And he's going to tell us about the Conservationists Toolkit and how to share experiences.
Thank you very much. Is that okay? Everyone can still hear me? Perfect. So thank you very much. Yeah, I am Daniel Maloney. I come from Cork in Ireland. I'm currently in my third year of my PhD. And today I am going to be introducing you to a tool that came about from a literature review that was published back in November. And I just want to preface it by saying, despite the name similarity, this doesn't relate to the previous talk. This is separate work. So I started off by wanting to conduct a literature review, basically looking at how do zoos contribute to conservation projects, what are the methodologies involved, and compile a resource that people could use to increase their own understanding if they were new to the area, or even if they were new to a particular area within zoo conservation. So as we were going through the methodologies, it kind of changed a little bit and things shifted into where we went with it, and we ended up developing this tool that we named the Conservationists Toolkit. So to get there, we essentially used an OR package called LitSearcher, which you can extract the most common words and phrases across a bunch of papers that you upload into it, and from that you can build a search that you refine down to get a sample of papers that you can then review. It took about a dozen different searches to get there, because the first one was so broad it came up with about 400,000 results, which I wasn't planning on going through. My supervisors might have had different ideas. But we eventually got there, and we wrote up this literature review, which, if you do your favorite activity and follow the QR code, you will be able to see. But the specific part of it that I want to talk about today is the framework tool that we put together from the knowledge compiled through that review. And essentially, the framework is a set of questions, a checklist of understanding what other people have done in their conservation projects to become successful in their results, and to help new early career researchers and even more experienced researchers to simply not have to keep a list of questions in your head for when you're developing or managing a project, and to give you a tool that you can just go to and have a list of options to go through and see, have we considered this? Do we need to consider this? Is it relevant? So we split those questions up into 3 key pillars, which I felt were the most represented pillars out of all of the conservation literature that we read. And those were the knowledge that you need to complete a project, the tools you need to use throughout the project, and of course, the collaboration that is required to see a project through to the end. So I'm just going to briefly go through each of the 3 pillars, and then I'll move on to a case study that I'm working on to show how you can apply it to ongoing work or use it for developing new work. But essentially, the knowledge pillar is about the information that you need regarding the species, the habitat, the issues surrounding survival of the species, and whether or not there's local knowledge that you can tap into to help the success of your project. And pointing out a couple of key areas that I felt may be overlooked sometimes were looking into local cultural regions that you might have to work in. Is there somebody you might want to approach to ensure that you are respecting their culture and not unintentionally interfering with anything of religious or spiritual importance? Are the reasons for the original decline for the animal still present? The amount of research articles that I went through that didn't actually address whether or not the initial issue had been resolved was quite surprising. So has that been addressed? Because if not, why are we looking to conserve the species by reintroducing animals if the problem still exists that initially saw their numbers reduce? And again, tapping into the local historical and anecdotal understanding of the species to be able to know where are they, what are their life cycles like, do they differ from other populations of the same species in the country or in the region that you're in, and that way building up your knowledge of the species going forward for the project. For the tools, it came down to 3 areas. Simply put, what tools do I need to collect my data? What tools do I need to analyze? And what tools do I need for sharing the information once I have it? And again, just a couple of things I want to point out. I think quantifying the cost of projects is something, while a lot of people are doing it, not everyone is, and I think it's something that should be encouraged and pushed. Having that kind of information helps a lot when we go to seek more funding. If we can put a dollar sign on a project and say, this is what it costs, this is what we can do with what you give us, this is why we're asking for more. I think that is an important lesson for everyone to take away, whether early career or not. In recent years, AI has become more of a topic of conversation, and there are different views on the topic. I'm not going to go into that. I'm simply putting it in here and trying to say I don't think it is something we should be afraid of. I think it is something that has value to our work if used properly and if understood properly. And I think alongside that, it also opens up the opportunity for cross-disciplinary and interdisciplinary projects, which I found can come away with some very interesting results. And also, something that might seem obvious but surprised me was in the literature that we conducted, we used a random sample of 100 papers. 30 of those papers provided full methodologies and were completely sufficiently replicable. 70 of those papers were missing information that would make their work replicable. It might be something as simple as not naming what software they were using, or simply referring to the type of tests they were doing without any explanation of why they chose it. But for good science, we're supposed to make it replicable, and these papers were not. So this is something else that I think is very important to keep in mind. And finally, from listening to everyone who has spoken before me today in conversations around the breaks and at lunch, I think we all agree that probably the most important thing in any conservation project is going to be the collaboration. The amount of people involved, while communication gets trickier with the more people involved, the more people involved, the more you can actually do. So understanding who do I need to be collaborating with in my own team, in my local area, in the focus area of conservation, what governments, what PR people, and having a good understanding of that network of communication that you need to get your conservation project out there, and to also ensure that the results are shared in a way that is understandable and translated into language that can be understood by different audiences. So, to go to a case study that I am working on with Fota Wildlife Park, the natterjack toad is one of only 3 native species in Ireland, and in the boundary of Ireland it's classified as endangered. So about 8 years ago, the National Parks and Wildlife Service in Ireland, Fota Wildlife Park and Dingle Aquarium came together to begin a head starting project, which essentially is when they collect the egg spawn from the wild, bring it into captivity, allow it to go through metamorphosis, and bring the toadlets back out to the wild to try and give them a chance to get through that vulnerable period and increase their survivability. So the reason for decline in Ireland is mostly due to change of landscape. They use very ephemeral ponds that come and go throughout the year depending on rainfall and weather conditions, and with changing climate and different agricultural practices, these ponds have essentially become far more unpredictable and have resulted in much more fragmented populations. So now we are at the point where we only have some very small areas where natterjacks are found in Ireland, down around the southwest coast. So these are the Dingle and Iveragh peninsulas, and you can see there's only 3 areas where known populations are existing, and this one is the one that we work in most, where the extraction and the reintroduction of eggs is mostly conducted. So if we look at the project from the perspective of the toolkit, there's a lot of knowledge that came about from the National Parks and Wildlife, from their previous work on the species. The local community has a lot of knowledge. They're very proud of the animal, knowing the fact that they are one of the few protectors of the natterjack toad left in Ireland. They've become very invested in actually making sure the species continues in the wild. So they provide knowledge about locations of where toads can be found, their life cycle, etc. And we also need to know what are the potential risks to these animals. What is the future of the population and how could it be impacted? The main issue that currently exists is the fragmentation and the change of landscape use. But there are other potential issues such as the chytrid fungus, which is decimating amphibian populations worldwide. Thankfully, touch wood, it hasn't made it to Ireland yet, or at least there are no recorded evidence of it making it to Ireland. But if it did, it has the potential to simply wipe out the natterjack population and not have anything left for us to conserve. So understanding what the issues are allows us to then look towards, well, how can we protect against it? How can we look to protect the populations as we're moving them around the country and exposing them to different places? What precautions do we need to take to ensure we aren't unintentionally corrupting and infecting the population? With regards to tools, so I have just one of my projects working on natterjacks, but previous work has been done by Dr. Marina Rain from Queen's University Belfast. She just recently completed her PhD, which was entirely based on the natterjack populations. And she has done mat-set modelling, genetic analysis, viability analysis. I am using genetics on my project to try and monitor family lines that are going through the project, to try and track them as they mature, to therefore come up with some measure of survivability for FOTA to actually understand the impact they're having. And then when we look at collaboration, there are a lot of invested parties in this project. It's not just national parks, there's FOTA Wildlife, Dingle, and then beyond that there's Queen's, my own college, University College Cork. The local community, like I said, have had serious investment in the project. They are very much a proud community of toads. Even one of the local pubs is called the Natterjack after the toads. And they care and they check in, and the local Conservation Association has different projects and they put on different education talks for the community and the locals, educating them about the animals in the area and the projects that are happening. So all of these collaborators work together, we communicate. Probably communication could be better. We all know how fragmented things can be when this number of organisations are involved. You may be getting information second or third hand down the line. So I think collaboration can always improve. But just in such a small project in the southwest of Ireland, you already have that many collaborators. So, just pointing out some of the work that Marina has done on the toads, she has looked to understand the future of the Natterjacks in Ireland, and as it currently stands with the methods she has used, she has come away with results that don't show any favourable future, essentially as things stand. But we do have some interesting results in that max modelling she conducted shows the changing climate may actually benefit the toads in the future. So there's mixed information and mixed knowledge, which is why it's important to continue work on these animals, and which is why I'm continuing my work. And another PhD student has just recently started with the National Parks and Wildlife to continue looking at the Natterjacks and understanding what is happening with them in our country. So going back to the toolkit and what I envision for it, hopefully in the future, I don't want it to be a once-off, set in stone tool that never gets updated and just stagnates. Ideally, what I would like to do is go back to it, update it as I learn more about the field, meet more people, learn more about what others are doing. Even since this has been out, I know changes that I would make to it just based off of people I've spoken to and projects I've come across. So, similar to Meller's domains model, I'd like to actually update it to keep with the times, to provide an actual valuable tool to people that they can then use for their own conservation projects. I'd also like it to be used as an education tool. I think for me, coming into my PhD, there was quite a learning curve regarding zoo conservation, understanding all the variable facets that are ongoing both in situ and ex situ. So for earlier career researchers or people who are just coming into the field, I feel that this paired with the literature review gives a reasonably decent overview of the projects zoos get involved with for conservation efforts, and thereby can increase that level of understanding much faster than just having to go out and figure it out as you go. So I just quickly say a thank you to my supporters, FOTA Wildlife Park, the Irish Research Council and my college UCC, and I'll leave it there and take any questions once.
We have time for one or two questions, so Frederica.
Are you putting your data on the web page on the zoo library, your research papers?
I will be after hearing about it today.
Thank you.
Any other question? Thank you very much. We go on with a presentation by João Neves from Zumarine in the south of Portugal, which is going to talk about integrating behavior change for effective conservation strategies and the impact of human activity.
Okay, hello everybody. My name is João, a difficult name to pronounce. But I'm going to bring you something completely different and somewhat related to what we've been listening to, but unrelated, different, because I'll be focusing on the animals like you guys instead of the other animals that you love so much. So, you all know, I'm not going to preach to the choir, you all know this, conservation has gone a long way. We know from Michael Soule's work, conservation biology, as a first discipline, a synthetic discipline, had loads of other within disciplines, and I'm going to highlight the social sciences back in '85 was already there, and I'm going to highlight throughout this presentation the social sciences. So it's over there, but that was back in '85. If you look to the other side of the slide, you'll see the conservation science that you all use right now. And there's conservation biology is only one discipline within the wealth of other disciplines as well. And I'm going to highlight now the ones that belong to the social sciences. So as you can see, easily see, social sciences are really present in conservation. Although this room is full of biologists, and I'm a biologist as well, but we have to realize that you cannot do conservation without looking at social sciences. And I'm trying not to bother you too much. So moving on to, I know that you guys do a lot of really good job on conservation. And if we look at the American perspective, this paper shows us that our American colleagues, between that 20-year period, I can read it here, but I cannot read it because it's too small. They published around 5,000 articles within this 20-year time frame, and the main topics were this. And that's the European perspective as well, at JSR, and a 20-year period as well. 3,000 articles, something like that, and the main topics were these ones. Okay, you probably know where I'm trying to get. And the top subjects were those, and you don't find the social sciences anywhere. So there are social sciences, and there are some articles and some really good papers published related to conservation, but they don't get even close to the top subject areas. And this is how we see, it's not a bad thing, it's just the way we look at conservation. We look at conservation mostly from the biological perspective. But there's a huge perspective that we're not looking at, which is the social one, social sciences. And as you all know, there's one common actor. This is a question that I had for you some slides ahead, but anyway, you know what the main driver of conservation issues is. So what if we use a different approach when we look at conservation? You know this, Mafongwe already showed us this image, but I don't want you to look at the numbers, I want you to look at the landscape, at the background of that image, cropped image over there. It looks something like this. You know, this is Earth. For those of you who don't really know what it is, this is Earth. But I'm going to challenge you guys to look at Earth from a different perspective. But first of all, you know where the Czech Republic is? You probably do. So it's somewhere around there. I don't know if I really pinpoint it right, but anyway, it's around there. So I'm going to ask you, if we look at this image from a different perspective, would you find the Czech Republic easily? This is the exact same image. from a different perspective. But you struggle, don't you? It's not the same. So what I'm trying to get here with this presentation is trying to challenge you to look at conservation in a different way. I know that it's not too comfortable from time to time, and I speak for myself because I'm a biologist and I've been training myself for social sciences for almost 15 years now, and I still struggle. So I keep on moving back to biology, so I know it's not straightforward. I just want to highlight that the social sciences is the inclusion of social sciences, although you saw that conservation biology already stated that social sciences were there. If you look at this image, you'll find that people in nature only since 2010, so 14 years ago, we started looking at conservation in general through an interdisciplinary social and ecological science approach. So we were only 14 years ago, we started moving towards the fusion of the two perspectives, the two theoretical perspectives. So the authors say the need for and this is from 2021, and the authors still in 2021, 3 years ago, they say that there is a need for a more interdisciplinary approach to conservation by including the integration of social sciences. This integration can lead to more effective and sustainable conservation efforts. So the question is it too soon to talk about social sciences? Should we wait more time? I don't think so. Back in 2006, these authors said that there's a growing need, the exact same stuff that you just read in 2021. There's a growing recognition on the importance of social science in conservation, particularly in understanding the human dimensions of conservation issues. Moving on to 2017, these authors, they recognize the essential role of social sciences in addressing global environmental crisis across policy, practice, and research. And even more, they also gave us the tools to understand how to mainstream social sciences, and we still have not yet done it. But we know that most of the barriers are ideological, institutional, capacity related, and knowledge related as well. So there's a plethora of disciplines to choose from when you consider adding on social sciences to conservation. There's classic, there's applied, and there's interdisciplinary disciplines. If you look closely, you'll start to notice that they are not so strange from your daily approach to conservation. So you're already using social sciences. Some of you may not know, others already know it. But if you look at, I'm going to highlight some of those. Conservation marketing. I don't know if you are too comfortable with conservation marketing, but whenever you say that you need to engage your visitors just like that, you're at least trying to use the tools from conservation marketing. Conservation education. I don't need to explain. Human dimensions of conservation, human-wildlife conflict, and so forth. Environmental psychology, this is my favorite one. Human geography, you cannot do conservation without understanding where people sit, where people move, and so forth, and the history of the place and so forth. And ecological economics. I'm not going to go through all of those, but you can easily see that all of these are really important and relevant for conservation. With this in mind, and hopefully I'll have you now in my wavelength, considering the social sciences. And we already listened about project planning, and this is really curious. Because some of the topics that I mentioned here were already discussed before, so it's really nice. Project planning, you can name it whatever you want, but it goes back to a circle, and it goes back to problem analysis, context analysis, theory of change, monitoring and evolution, resources and capacity, and it will move on as a full circle. But to reach this, you have to ask some questions whenever you have a conservation project that you want to put up. When you consider the social sciences, it gets more layers into the discussion. So using the social sciences lenses, I'm going to show you some of the questions that you already ask yourself whenever you put up a conservation project. So I'm going to move forward really fast so that you can understand that most of these questions already have social science in it. So from the problem analysis, what is the ecological, social and economical, political, look, social, economical, political context, all social sciences. What are the key stakeholders? Social sciences. What policies, laws, institutions, social sciences. Context analysis. I'm going to go through. I don't need to further explain this. You are pretty intelligent, so I'm just going to... Theory of change. We had a really big lesson on theory of change. You can understand this pretty easy. Although here it may be a little bit more difficult to understand where the social sciences get in, but whenever there's people, there are social sciences. Monitoring and evaluation. Also, to have a project going on, you need to evaluate. That's a must. It's not a big thing as well. And resources and capacity, financial, human, technical may not be, but partnerships and collaborations. So all of the disciplines from social sciences are within this. Okay? So there's a common actor in almost all questions, which is not Trump. All of us. Trump included. So does this make more sense to you now? Looking at this image from this perspective now. It's the exact same image, but it's upside down. It's like the Australians see us. So, okay. So we need to start somewhere. And now I'm going to bring a really short case study, which is our own. I'm not going to go into deep, but this is our experience at Zoomer in Portugal. We know that we're not a big player in conservation, but since we don't have the budget and the capacity, human capacity and financial capacity to do really good job as you guys do, we started to look at how we can do something that could be a valid, we could be seen as a valid player within the zoological community and within the conservation community. And this is our step-by-step approach. As you can imagine, I'm going to talk about social sciences, not really into the animals, the other animal, two-legged animals that come in and pay the ticket and help us fund all of this stuff. We started with capacity building like 15 years ago on social sciences. I was the first one, unfortunately, but I would rather learn from anyone else. But I started myself pitching the social sciences within the zoo. As you can imagine, I was talking to a wall because nobody was trained to understand social sciences. I'm still talking to a wall, probably here as well, but in the zoo, I'm still talking to a wall, unfortunately, but I'll get there. So we started 15 years ago by building internal motivation, which is difficult, as you can understand. We hire mostly biologists, and we were talking about this. We hire mostly biologists, and biologists don't really understand what social sciences is. I relate to that as well. And we started by, a few years ago, by opting for recruiting, especially for the education team, for recruiting non-biologists. You may well have a different perspective on this, but it's turning out to be really good because you can learn biology on its basics, but the biologists don't necessarily know how to engage our audience. So I rather hire people that really know how to engage the audience and then learn the biology. That's what we're here for, instead of the opposite, because we get biologists that don't really have it in them to communicate and so forth. They know all the stuff about the animals, but they don't really know how to communicate. From time to time we get one really good biologist, but that's it. So we opted for recruiting differently. I'm not saying that we don't recruit any more biologists for the education team, but we tend to choose another type of educators. We also started with small size research, and this was to break the self-fulfilling prophecy of most biologists, and probably some of you as well, that will say, well, I'm not going into social science because I don't know how to do it. So this will reinforce itself, and I will say, well, I'm not going to do it, don't ask me to do it because I cannot do it. So this will reinforce itself, and people don't get out of that vicious circle. So by hiring non-biologists and by having the biologists and the educators and so forth doing small-size research, they start to understand why it's so important to do social sciences within the zoo. And this will lead to increased capacity building as well, because they will learn the tools and they will begin to understand, oh, I'm asking these questions, this is why I'm asking these questions. It's not so strange, and it will get ingrained in them. And then it will end up by developing critical thinking within our conservation team and our education team, because they all belong together. And we also started by seeking outside expertise. We already listened to this today as well. We seek expertise outside because we don't know, we're kind of new to social sciences. So we're learning from knowledge people. And we're trying to avoid common mistakes without knowing anything about the issue. It's quite easy to do mistakes. And finally, and this will end up the cycle, cultural shift within the organization. I'm not there yet because I'm still talking to a wall whenever I speak to the board. They don't really understand why I'm so into social sciences, but at a small pace, I know and I feel like I'm reaching people inside, other zoo staff, non-biologists, non-related to the animals. Step by step I'm getting there. So this is a long-term approach. So don't give up just yet. I'm saying this to myself, okay? Don't give up just yet, because it will be probably to change the mindset of the company. It will be more 10 years with this, trying to talk to the wall. And then a year and a half we started with partnership with one of the researchers that I thought of doing work with him, which is Diogo Verissimo. I don't know if you know him, but he had a strange idea, and he contacted me about doing a behavior change task force. I'm not into the behavior change task force, but he's the founder, he's the chair. But he called me because we had this partnership with research in social sciences, and he said, look, João, I need half-time of an educator or somebody to help me out being a program officer with this task force. I immediately found a way to give him half of a person, and he now has a full-time project, a program officer dedicated to this task force. I'm not going to go into detail about this task force, but this is an official IUCN task force on behavior change, and it's mostly a knowledge broker between conservation, between your work, and behavior-centered solutions. So this, and I'm highlighting this now, this is a tool for all of you guys, okay? It's still in the making. They're doing a pretty good job, but they're still in the beginning. They're almost a year and a half of existence. They're doing really big research now, on needs assessment on conservation. I don't know if any of you guys were interviewed by the task force. I guess you were, Katie. Yeah. So there are some players in the conservation world, not related to zoo and related to zoo, that they've been doing some interviews, and they're now at the stage of doing a proper content analysis of that, and this will lead to a needs assessment. And I can assure you that the needs assessment mostly relates to capacity building. So this is Diogo. Please write down the website over there, or just Google the name Conservation Behavior Change Task Force. You will get there. Ask Diogo about whatever you want to. He is completely willing to help you out, and they're drawing up tools to help conservation worldwide. So they have a bunch of really intelligent guys working, like 12 of them, and this is the disciplines: psychology, social marketing, communication, economics, behavior change policy, environmental policy, education, design thinking, and so forth. And also have in mind that they have in their statement to help zoos and aquariums as well within the conservation. So have in mind this is a really key player for all of us, not for you, but for us as well. Okay? And this is my second last slide. You all know what it is, conservation species survival center, and hopefully after 10 years, but it will be more or less 15 years of slowly capacity building capacity within the zoo. We're aiming for having at Zoomarine, hosted by Zoomarine, the first and only center for species survival based on behavior change. So it's a slow process, but we're getting there. We're building up capacity within the zoo, and we're mostly, because we don't do conservation work as you guys do in situ and so forth, we do it but in a really small scale. This is where we can excel as well, and we can help out the community. So, a final thought. I know that it's time. Final thought. This is for you to ask back at your zoos. Okay? What is conservation to all of your non-conservation colleagues? And this is a social science question, okay? And it has a lot of layers in it. It sounds like a simple question, but it's not. Because most of you guys have a really similar mindset of what conservation is, but your colleagues at the zoo who don't work with the animals, they're also zoo people. And they're also the ones taking the message home and to their friends and online and so forth. So please ask them what conservation is, and you'll be surprised. Okay? Thank you, guys.